Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
Jay and Madcap both sent me this story, and we talked recently about getting DUIs on things other than the obvious. So let's suppose you were riding a lawn tractor down the sidewalk and you were under the influence. Can you be ticketed for that? And in most states, yes, you can. You might say, but Steve, I'm not on the road, I'm not in a car. Well, it depends on how your states define what you can and cannot do out in public while intoxicated. So the headline here is a California man arrested for allegedly riding his horse while under the influence. The Daily Mail ran the story. Jenna Amatuli wrote it. Highway Patrol shares a social media post after officers detained a rider impaired by alcohol while on his horse. And I will have people weigh in on this, and I will agree with you on this, that a lot of horses out there are smarter than the people riding them. So there's a good chance that if you were someplace else with your horse and you were drunk, if you climbed on the back of your horse and laid your head down and fell asleep and stayed on the horse, there's a good chance that horse will get you home. Good chance. Depends on how far you are from home. But like I said, it's better than if the drunken person is trying to guide the horse and has no idea what they're doing because they're so out of their mind on alcohol. But the California man was arrested this week after he was discovered to be driving under the influence, except the man was not behind the wheel of a car and was riding his horse with an open container of alcohol, according to police. And by the way, the word driving in this context has a slightly different meaning, but it's being used correctly. Because if you look up words in dictionaries, and I know some people find this so hard to believe, but over here are dictionaries, the Oxford English Dictionary, but I've got more. I have more dictionaries than you could count, okay? I have dictionaries till the end of man, okay? And a word like drive will have many, many meanings. It depends on the context. Now, a lot of statutes will say, here's what we mean by the word drive, and it'll say to operate an automobile on a roadway, et cetera, et cetera. But when they talk about cattle or animals, to drive an animal means that you're in control of an animal and you're moving it from one place to another. You've heard of the phrase cattle drive, okay? So the man wasn't operating the horse. Technically speaking, he was driving the horse. But believe it or not, the law says driving or riding animals. In that case, driving is not like this. It is usually like this, okay? So the Highway Patrol officer involved in this discovered a horseback rider carrying an open container of alcohol. You know, if you're going to make it easy for them. So the Highway Patrol officer contacted the rider, and it became evident that the rider was impaired by alcohol, leading to their arrest for DUI. And that's a question. If somebody's drunk and they're up on that horse, are they going to get hurt getting down? It's worth noting, the CHP says, according to California Vehicle Code 21050, the rules of the road apply to those operating animals on the highway. Now, they use the word operating in that sense, so I'm not sure exactly how it's phrased in their statute. But if you are riding on an animal, and so a lot of people ask these questions, they say, well, Steve, what if I was operating a big wheel? You know, that toy with the plastic front wheel and plastic back wheels, it's 3 wheels, and way down here, big wheel. What if I was operating that? Okay, it's a wheeled vehicle, but it's not self-propelled. And so you have to look at the definitions on these things, but usually with drunk driving, they have very, very, very broad definitions. We don't want people out in public drunk doing things where they could either hurt themselves or other people. The vehicle code states that every person riding or driving an animal upon a highway has all of the rights and is subject to all the duties applicable to the driver of a vehicle. So the fact that it's an animal doesn't matter because they say animals equal vehicles if you're riding or driving them. Lest you be concerned about the safety of the horse, the officer reportedly displayed true compassion and ensured the return of the horse to its home after the arrest. And I'm going to tell you right now that the question is, what do you do? Because I used to drive a tow truck. I've towed cars and trucks and Jeeps and all kinds of things. I towed a piano once, which is why there's a license plate that says piano tow back there. And, of course, I've towed motorcycles. But what would I have done if I'd encountered a horse? Well, where I was towing vehicles, we didn't have horses in that town. But I can tell you that a couple of years ago, I looked at my front yard, and there's a horse out there with a police officer in the morning. So I go walking out there and I say hello to the police officer. And he goes, "How are you doing?" He goes, "Is this your horse?" No. And he said, "Oh, okay." And so I stood up there and talked to them for a while. They explained to me the calls they got about this horse walking around in this neighborhood, and it wound up in front of my house, and they were simply following it. They weren't trying to catch it or anything. They were simply following it to make sure it's safe. And they'd called somebody to bring a horse trailer who was an expert in handling horses, who then got the horse on the trailer without much of a kerfuffle, and eventually they found the owners. Years later, I met the owner of the horse. I know the horse's name. And I was talking to this person. They had horses. I look at the horse and I go, "That horse looks familiar. Did it get out a couple years ago?" And she goes, "Yes. How'd you know?" I go, "They found it in my front yard." And she goes, "You're kidding me." I go, "No." And she told me that her family had gone on vacation and somebody had come over, was supposed to take care of the horses, and came over one day and did a head count, and one was missing. But there was no obvious way the horse had gotten out. It's a mystery. And so immediately called law enforcement, who said, "Oh, the police one town over picked up a horse. We think it's yours." So they got the horse back. But handling a horse would be a little different than handling a motorcycle or a car or a big wheel or a piano for that matter. Well, no one was hurt in this unusual incident. The California Highway Patrol reminded people of the dangers of the road, regardless of whether you're on a horse or in a car. This incident serves as a reminder that impaired riding, even on a horse, poses risks to both the rider and others on the road. We commend the officer's dedication to upholding safety standards in all situations. Let's continue to prioritize responsible and sober actions on our roadways. And so it's not the first instance I've heard of somebody being ticketed on horseback for imbibing the alcohol while traveling about. But it makes complete sense that they would do that because you don't want people out there. In fact, given the choice, if you said, "Steve, there's two people out there right now, both of whom are equally drunk. One of them's on a horse, one of them's in a car, and the cops only got time to write one a ticket." I'd say go get the guy on the horse. Because among other things, I feel sorry for the horse. But I know it's a couple people in the audience who are really into horses. "Hey, Mike, how you doing?" And they're going to check in and say, "Steve, you understand that that horse is more likely than not smarter than the guy on his back." Probably, and I'll agree with you on that. By the way, it's funny because I'm not in the sense like I actually rode a horse about 5 years ago. But prior to that, I hadn't ridden a horse in decades. So I'm not really into horses in the sense that some people are. But I've always loved horses. I love dogs. I love most animals. But I have a special place in my heart for dogs and horses. And there's something about horses that they just strike me as such big and powerful creatures. But they're also usually quite peaceful. And something about an animal that weighs as much as your car that's that peaceful around you, and it lets you ride it, and you know darn well if it wanted to, it could throw you off and trample you into the ground. But it chooses not to. So I've always respected that. So fascinating story. Jay and Madcap, thanks for sending it from the Daily Mail. Jenna Amatuli wrote it. California man arrested for allegedly riding a horse while under the influence of alcohol. The CHP says don't do that because that is against the law, at least in California. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. It's the damage that we do and never know. It's the words we don't say that scare me so.